Good afternoon from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Bo Campers here on the Intercoastal. I'm Brad Michaels, your host for Dolphin Radio. I'm here with John Bach. John, great to see you again.
Great to see you as well.
Yeah, long time no see.
Another beautiful day here in South Florida. We got a great setup here at Bo Campers.
Absolutely, and we want to thank Bo Campers an awful lot for letting us do the show here. I want to jump right into it. We talked about this yesterday at length. We've been talking about this actually for about a week. The Xavier Howard situation. And yesterday on Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio coined that phrase.
The hold in.
The hold in. Thank you. I was losing my train of thought there for a second. The hold in. There's a lot of players that are doing that. Stephon Gilmore, Aaron Rodgers, we've talked about that. But let's get to the Dolphins and Xavier Howard. Is this going to be something that's going to be detrimental to the team if it goes on too long?
Well, these situations, it can be detrimental. This should have been handled in the offseason. Obviously, the Dolphins didn't want to redo his contract again. They just redid his contract in 2018. But this causes a distraction. You know, his team and his agent, they should have handled this in the offseason. It's the first time in a long time that Dolphin fans are really excited about the upcoming year.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that we needed this right now going into training camp. He still has 2 years left on his deal. I think he should have left it out of the conversation and handled it in the offseason.
Well, I agree with you there. And he came out, obviously, when he reported to camp on Tuesday. Tuesday night, he came out, I think it was either Instagram or Twitter or maybe both. And he stated his case, said that him and his agent approached the Dolphins with several different ideas that they thought were beneficial for both sides, and the Dolphins didn't want to budge. So he's demanding a trade or more money.
Yes, but again, this should have been handled in the offseason. The Dolphins didn't want to do it. He's under contract. He needs to live up to the contract that he signed in 2018. The one thing about players is, they always want to get paid what they're due, and I understand that. No one wants to have uncertainty going with their career forward. But he's still 2 years under contract. He was the highest paid DB in the NFL, and if the Dolphins didn't want to re-up him, he still has to live up to his contract.
And I agree with you, and I kind of understand. Chris Sims said the same thing. He understands Howard's position. But at the same time, like you said, he's under contract. And he is in camp. He is honoring his contract. And that's where this whole term hold in comes from, is these players under the new CBA, they can't hold out because they're subject to $50,000 a day in fines. So players like Aaron Rodgers, Xavier Howard, they're all coming to camp, but they're disgruntled. They want more money, or they want to trade, whatever the case might be. So that they're only coming to camp to avoid that $50,000. Is that something you think, as an owner, if you were an owner, or from a league standpoint, you might want to rethink in the next?
I'm not sure. We've always had holdouts and people that wanted to go a different direction. The fact that he's in camp, he's living up to his contract, but again, on him, taking the devil's advocate side of it, if he wouldn't have played as well as he did, he still would have been making that money, and I'm sure he wouldn't have given any of it back.
Most likely would not have given any of it back. But you brought that up yesterday, and I said that 10 is a magic number for him. He led the league last year in interceptions with 10, but he missed 10 games. Was it the year before?
2018.
2018.
Right after they redid his contract, he missed 10 games.
He missed 10 games, and, of course, he's not going to give any of the money back when he misses games for injury.
Well, nobody does, and I was disappointed in Aaron Rodgers as well. Aaron Rodgers, again, they've had the entire offseason to discuss it with ownership. Ownership has decided that they didn't want to do anything at this point. So to bring it to camp, I think they're trying to hold the teams hostage with the media presence with it.
Yeah.
And it puts everybody in a bad situation.
Well, it brings me back to the situation with Terrell Owens many, many years ago with not only the Eagles, but then he did the same thing, I think, with the Cowboys.
Yeah, well, it wasn't good either. I mean, I still remember him doing his sit-ups in the weight room versus not giving interviews. So That was comical. But again, Terrell Owens was famously known as a me guy, and he probably tarnished his career quite a bit with the holdouts and some of the shenanigans that he pulled.
Absolutely, and I think you want to make sure. I think from a team standpoint, not just the Dolphins. I think any team in the league may want to rethink the CBA when it comes time to renegotiate a contract with the players, because I think there's a lot of the players, and especially the coaches, probably would rather have these players go ahead and stay home, Don't be that distraction. Stay home, and we'll work it out somehow behind the scenes instead of you coming to camp and getting up there behind the microphones and telling the whole world what you're disgruntled about.
Of course. I mean,
That's
that's
how
always
separate that locker room.
It's Colin Cowherd said something pretty smart the other day. I was listening to him, and when someone becomes disgruntled, it's best just to get rid of them as soon as you can, because you also have the most capital. You'll get the most capital for the trade. And he brought up the Lou Alcindor when he wanted out of Milwaukee back in the day,
right.
and used it as an example before social media and before all this stuff was so popular and the 24-hour news coverage that we get. So, again, I don't like distractions, and most players don't. You spent all season working out, rehabbing, getting yourself ready for the season. I think the last thing other players want to do is have to comment on somebody else's contract.
Well, exactly, and that brings up the whole thing. When you're on, we have the social media aspect now. We have the internet, and that started in the late 90s. That changed everything as far as the entire landscape for all of sports, but especially the NFL, because it's the most popular. When you played, you were in the very early stages of the internet and 24 hours, 7 days a week news and information. How much of the information that is out there versus what actually goes on in the locker room is true and what isn't true?
We always used to laugh that the reporters had no idea what they were talking about. What's really going on inside the locker room. Somebody hears one little tidbit and they want to create a complete narrative out of it. But now in today's media, though, people are voicing it themselves, and everyone sees them out in public on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
Exactly.
It's a completely different animal. But also now, though, the players have more leverage because they can use that social media to leverage themselves, just like we're talking about Xavier Howard right now. Without social media, we wouldn't be discussing him.
Exactly.
That would be an in-house deal.
And he has publicly been able to come out and demand a trade or more money. And I think if you give him more money, maybe you're putting a Band-Aid where you probably should put a tourniquet.
But that's the problem Green Bay's having right now.
Exactly.
They could have addressed this in the offseason. I understand where Aaron Rodgers was coming from, but here again, they've had all offseason to be able to discuss these things and work it out. And instead, it didn't get worked out, so the players feel slighted. So now they want to use this opportunity with the media to put themselves back at the forefront.
Absolutely. And we'd like to hear from you, the listeners and the viewers, what you think of this, and we'll probably be able to discuss it next week a little bit more in depth if it's still a situation, which it probably will be one way or another. He's either here or he might be gone.
No one knows what's going to happen right now.
And speaking of no one knows what's going to happen now with this situation, and the Dolphins show so much promise. I mean, we win 5 games in Flores' first year. We win 6 and 10, just barely missed the playoffs. Nice boat coming through, I hope. They're going to raise the bridge. If the players can focus and stay off of it, and even if Howard stays, if there's no trade, he stays like a professional. He does his job, and doesn't have what Florio talked about, having these little nagging injuries. My hamstring. I can't go full strength today. And talking to the trainers, let's take that out of the equation. What do you think of the Dolphins' outlook this year for this season?
I'm very excited for it. Again, this is one of the first times in the last 20 years that I've been excited about the start of the season. I think Coach Flores and Chris Greer have done an excellent job assembling this team. They tore it down and they rebuilt it, and they rebuilt it with guys with character.
Yep.
And so to have this situation with Xavier is it's disheartening a little bit, because we're hitting on so many cylinders right now we haven't hit on in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if we were 11-6 this year. I think that would be a very, very obtainable goal this year.
I think it is. I think it's a great possibility of being able to improve by one game. And of course, we're in a 17-game schedule this year. We go down to 3 preseason games. The Dolphins only have 1 preseason game at home. That's on August 20th against the Falcons. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, isn't that the last? No, that's the second to last preseason game. What are they going to do, though? I know, in the past you had the first preseason game was just kind of like a walkthrough, basically. Your second preseason game, the starters come in for maybe a series or 2, maybe even a quarter. By the time you get to the third and the fourth preseason games, you were having pretty much a half, because you wanted to see how your first team was going to do against the other team's first. How is that going to change with only 3 preseason games?
Well, I guess what they're going to do is they're going to have to accelerate the process now. So you're going to see the starters probably get a half in the first game, maybe 3/4, or at least the people that you're counting on, the guys you think are going to be your 53-man roster. I would guess that they're going to see the 3/4 in the second game, and then the third game it's going to be one series out. Get yourself ready for the season
And find out who your other 53 guys or your other guys to fill out the 53 are going to be.
Figure out who that last 8-9 roster spots are.
Right. What do you think is the biggest weakness that the Dolphins have coming into this season, and what do you think is their biggest strength?
Well, the biggest weakness, in my opinion, is the backfield. I think we have some good young players there. No one's really stepped out, and you can't say we have the guy right now. We don't have that. But our strength is our secondary in our defensive schemes. I think Coach Flores has done a fantastic job revamping the defense. So I think we're going to be defensively strong. Offensively, we're going to need somebody to step up at the running back position to help two out. I love the fact that we got another tight end. So we're going to be able to run multiple sets with multiple tight ends to help our running game, help the play action game, and help Tua come along. So I think they got everything they need right now. You just have to have a couple players step up.
And speaking of the tight end, we just signed him, Hunter Long. He signed his contract yesterday. So there's been some speculation, though, since the Dolphins they have so much depth at the tight end position, and they drafted Hunter Long. There's been a little bit of scuttlebutt that I've heard that the Dolphins might not be completely sold on Mike Gesicki. Anything on that front that you've heard?
I don't believe that. I think they like him very much. Again, I think he has 2 years left on his contract as well. But again, it's always about cap and how much money you're going to have for the future. Just because you love somebody doesn't mean you can keep them with the salary cap.
Absolutely.
And we run into that a lot.
Well, and that brings us right back to the situation with Howard. You know, we talked about this yesterday. You look at guys like Tom Brady in New England. He would take less money, restructure his contract, take a little less money, so give them a little bit more cap room to sign those guys they needed to round out that roster, and that's what wins championships. If you're just a me guy, you're not going to win a championship if all you want is the money.
It's very difficult. Again, all those numbers fit in. Everybody knows what everybody's making. Everybody wants to be one of the highest paid players. But the great players are willing to take less money to keep something going or to bring in another player that they want.
Exactly.
Which I think was what Aaron Rodgers was saying about his situation, is it wasn't about the money with him, but he wanted more control about who they're going to bring in and how everybody exits out of the Green Bay Packers. Now, I have mixed feelings about that because, one, yes, he's the face of the franchise,
Sure,
but he is not the GM and he's not the coach. So
Right.
you need those front office people to do their job, and you need to do your job as well.
Well, and I think when you allow a player to have that much leverage and that much input, now granted, I know he's the quarterback, and I know he wants certain receivers, he needs certain guys, but when you start to go ahead and give players that much control, you're conceding too much control, I think, to the players, and you're taking the job out of the GM's hands and out of the head coach's hands. And I think that becomes a bigger problem later on down the road because you're opening up that door to allow players in the future to come in and say, well, if you don't do this, then I'm not going to sign. I'm going to go somewhere else.
It's a catch-22. You know, you want to make all your players happy and you want everybody to be involved, but at the same time, when the tough decisions have to be made, you can't have somebody emotionally involved in a tough decision.
Right, and which makes it interesting to me that Brian Flores, to me, seems like the kind of coach that's, look, you're either going to play it my way or you're not going to be here. Kind of going back to the old days. Shula was that way. It's my way or the highway. You're going to do what I tell you to do, and you're going to do it how I tell you to do it, or I'll give you a ticket out of here, and you can go find someplace else where you can play. We've gone through the tough disciplinarian head coach like Don Shula, the Chuck Knowles. We've gone through another phase starting in the 90s and maybe all the way up until now, where you've had some coaches that were a little more of the player type coaches, if you will. Do you see a trend going back to some of the more disciplinarian type coaches like a Flores?
I'm not sure. I think the game's changed so much in the last 20 years. And social media has been a big part of that as well.
Sure.
Where players are a lot more attention to players than there used to be. I mean, everybody knew who your stars were, and those were the guys, the Jim Kellys, the Dan Marinos, and all that. But now, personalities are a lot different. And I learned this coaching college football when I was at FAU. some of these kids have been babied for so long that they can't take a tough coach, a disciplinarian.
Exactly.
And I think there has to be a lot more leverage or a lot more movement right now where, Bernie Kosar and I talked about this years ago. We talked to the Cleveland Browns, and we want to do something similar where you need to match the player with the guy that you hired as coach. Because I've seen players down here, we've had disciplinary coaches, and the kids couldn't handle the discipline. So they'd be run off real quick. You have a fiery coach with a mean personality versus a nice guy. And sometimes the mix, even though the player is great, the mix doesn't work.
Well, I think sometimes, again, it's a fine line, because if you've got a disciplinarian head coach, many players, maybe the majority of the players, fit into that system and they thrive in that system, but you've got one or two guys that could really be difference makers for your team, and they don't thrive in that situation. They need to be pampered a little bit more, maybe need to be, attaboys a little more often than some coaches will do. So it's a fine line, and I think what you said is, as far as having somebody that comes in and fits your system, it's the same personality-wise as it is fitting the system, the style of offense and defense that you want to play and what your coordinators want to plug in.
Sure, and the style of coaching.
Absolutely.
Some people, like I was always a player, you couldn't give me a compliment. You gave me a compliment, I'd screw up the next play. I needed somebody who rode me all the time. Where other guys always want compliments to get over their insecurities.
Sure.
So it's really delicate balance to have the coach and the player mix. And sometimes a guy's career can be ruined because it was just the wrong fit of the styles.
And that's a warning. I think that I would love that if Xavier Howard hears what we're talking about, remember that there's no I in team. This is a team sport, and you got to be able to have enough money under the cap in order to fit all the guys that you need onto that roster so that you can compete. So you're going to get your money, and you've gotten your money. I don't know how many more. Once you've got millions and millions, I don't know how many more millions is enough.
Well, most of us were poor kids growing up.
Okay,
so
that's true. I remember that.
So I mean, how much is enough? And I remember I got cut from Buffalo. I was a rookie, and they were coming off their fourth Super Bowl. And they weren't going to sign me, and I knew that. I knew I was going to get fired. But there was a player out there, John Davis, and he was a great player for a lot of years. But he couldn't even practice anymore. And I used to laugh saying he was a tin man when he came out to practice. He had metal knee braces, and he squeaked actually when he went out to practice.
Oh, wow.
And I looked at him, I'm like, well, how much is enough? I'm going to get fired. I got a young family. I'm trying to make it. But you're not going to make it the year. How much is enough? We all grew up poor kids. We all have enough money in the bank. So sometimes you got to sacrifice a little bit of money, and especially in Xavier Howard's case, where we want more talent to be brought in here. We have to have the cap room to do it.
Well, and you have to determine as a player, look, do I want to be a player that I want to make a ton of money, or do I want to be like Tom Brady and has 7 rings, or at least one or two?
Or do you want to play for a bad franchise?
Exactly. I mean,
do you want to go to the playoffs every year, or do you want another $500,000?
And that's what made us so good when Shula was the coach. Shula, I think it was Bum Phillips said it best. He could take his'n and beat urine, and he could take urine and beat his'n on any given Sunday. Shula was the type of coach, and what was it about Shula that was so special that he got everything he could out of every one of his players?
He was one of the best football coaches ever. He was the youngest one at the time, too, when he got the head job down here in Miami. We left Baltimore. But he pushed you through a threshold that you didn't want to be pushed through. And the guys that could push themselves through that threshold stayed, and they want to be in great players for him. But that's what we're talking about with coaching styles and player styles. Sometimes to get that player to go through a threshold, it takes a different type. It may take a different attitude or a different way to go about it.
Right, and you came in when Jimmy Johnson became the head coach. So you didn't have to deal with Don Shula's 12-minute run, but I'm sure you probably heard that you did.
Oh yeah,
so Johnson kept that.
I'm a Howard Schnellenberg guy. Howard learned it from Shula back in the 70s.
Yeah,
back
exactly.
in the 70s.
Yeah. So did you still had to do it under Johnson? He kept that, or
no? We moved. Well, we do that periodically, but Jimmy moved to the 16-110s.
Okay.
So that's just as hard. I'd rather do a 12-minute run than the 16-110s. But when I played for Coach Schnellenberger at Louisville, we had the 2.25 miles that we had to run every year, and we had to beat our time from the year before.
Wow.
So I mean, you show up. I showed up. I was 240 pounds, and then now I'm a senior at 290, and I still got to beat my times
Wow.
from the time I was a freshman.
And you said you weren't all that fast to begin with, right?
I was quick. I was just not fast, but I could run distance. So I know distance was good for me. I could. Even my son, he can run a 6-minute mile, and he's 300.
Speaking of your son, you said he's 6'4", 295 pounds about?
Anywhere between 295 and 305, depending on the day. But he's really put in so much work the last 2 years in. He completely revamped himself. He was probably 5'9", 335 a year ago or 2 years ago, and now he's grown 5 inches, and he went all the way down to 275 and then put another 25 pounds of muscle back on. So he's so proud about the hard work that he's put in.
Good, and congratulations to him. I'm looking forward to coming down here and coming to some of the games at Cardinal Gibbons. Want to go ahead, we want to move on to discuss the quarterback situation. I know everybody wants to know about that and what we think. We've got Tua, obviously, the starter. I want to put to rest, though, once and for all, this talk about Deshaun Watson. This front office is not going to pull a trigger and bring in Deshaun Watson, not when you got Tua sitting there.
If we were going to, we would have done it before the draft.
Exactly.
And there's no, from all indications, is we're sticking with Tua. The front office likes him. You know, I'd like to see some more out of him, but he was only a rookie last year. He was still coming off his hip injury. So this year will be a real test.
Well, and everybody's got to remember not only that hip injury, which was horrendous, that was the same injury that knocked Bo Jackson out of his football career. But we've come a long way in medicine. But Tua's also got 2 ankles that are basically tied together and held together with a knot on each side of his ankle. So he's pretty banged up, but he just came out and he said he feels 10 times better than he did last year. And he's much more comfortable with the playbook as well. And I said that last year. A lot of people were complaining that Tua doesn't look like he's smart enough to learn the NFL game. He doesn't know the plays. And I said, hey, he didn't have a regular off season. He didn't have training camp. You're sitting there. You're on Zoom meetings with your coaches. You're not doing physical practices.
I think people need to go back and look at Peyton Manning's rookie year.
Exactly.
He was horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, so, and we all, I think most of us consider Peyton Manning probably one of the smartest quarterbacks ever to play the game. And even his rookie year, he struggled very bad. I think he threw something like 21 interceptions and only had like 6 touchdowns.
Yeah, and to that point, Peyton Manning himself, he even said he had no idea coming out of Tennessee just how fast the NFL game is.
It's so much faster. I still remember being in Buffalo again. But 4 straight Super Bowls with that defense, with all the great players, Bruce Smith, but what I always said is the speed of the linebackers is the biggest difference between college and the NFL. Everyone runs 4.4, 4.5, and they're all 260 pounds and they can move.
Well, and you've even got guys on the defensive line that can move that fast. I mean,
Bruce Smith's one of the fastest people I've ever seen.
And didn't he? He was famous for the swim move, wasn't he?
Yeah, but I still remember being in practice one time with him and gave up my first sack in the NFL to him, by the way. But I still remember he's lined up outside the tackle, and he beat the guard inside and slapped Kelly in the head before he even got the ball. And I'm like, I've never seen anybody move that fast. He wasn't that big of a guy. He was 253 pounds. Everybody thinks Bruce Smith was this large man, but he really wasn't. He's only about 252 pounds.
And back to your career on the offensive line, you had some of the best numbers in sacks given up in your entire career.
Yeah, Sporting News had me ranked tied for number 3 with Larry Allen. I gave up 1 sack per 11 starts. So it's the best I could do. I wish I would have got more opportunities, but, ran into some injuries. And every time I got a break, it seems like I ran into an injury that would keep me out.
And that was what cut your career a little bit short.
That Monday night.
Shorter than it could have been.
Yeah, that shoulder injury on Monday night, that was the one I couldn't overcome. And I tried to overcome it, and I went to Oakland. But again, I don't like when people say, well, the reason I'm not playing is I got hurt. No, the reason I stopped playing was I wasn't good enough to overcome my injury. There's a lot of people that get hurt and they can overcome it and come back. Right. With the shoulder, the knee was fine, the ankle was fine, but the shoulder was just an injury that I wasn't good enough to overcome.
Well, and as an offensive lineman, you really need your shoulder to be in good shape because it's taken a beating every game. I mean, I know your whole body is taking a beating, but definitely your shoulders.
Yeah.
We're going to come to the offensive line real quick. I'm going to touch on our backup quarterback situation. Jacoby Brissett. Thoughts on him?
Haven't seen enough of him. I just really haven't seen enough of him enough playing time out of him. Again, the organization obviously believes in him. So we'll go through training camp and hopefully get some reps in the preseason, and hopefully we see some good things out of him.
Well, and Indianapolis obviously saw enough out of him last year. They kept him in as the starter, but didn't see enough in him to be the starter when they went off and pursued, and the name escapes me. I'll think of it after the show.
Philly, right?
Yeah, is it Nick Foles? Yes. So they bring in Nick Foles. Jacoby Brissett, of course, signs with us. So I guess we need to see but that's the thing. We need to see a lot of reps from him in preseason, but we also need to see a lot of reps from Tua. So I think Tua, obviously, he's going to take all the reps with the first team in practice.
Without a doubt.
And then he's going to get an awful lot of work in the preseason. How much, if you were to coach, how much time would you want to see Brissett on the field in a game situation during the preseason?
That's a tough call because, again, we have to, when you start talking about that, you also have to discuss Tua's injury history, and Tua has been a little bit banged up here in the last couple of years.
And do you handle him with kid gloves?
I don't think so. I think you have to throw Tua to the fire, and we got to make it or break it with him. And if that's Brissett not getting enough reps, then that's something we got to live with. So I'd give him a quarter in the first game. I'd probably give him a half in the second game. I mean, not quite a half, probably a quarter in the second game, and I'd probably give him a half or 3/4 in the final preseason game.
And saying that with he's got to make it or break it. Do you think with the Dolphins and the draft capital they have next year, do you think this is a make it or break it season for Tua to show, hey, I'm the franchise quarterback, you can count on me?
Yes, I think they have to. I think you take a page out of Arizona Cardinals, where they moved on from Rosenberg or whatever Josh Rosen and went after Kyle Murray. I think it's the same kind of situation we're in this year. We're never going to have these kind of picks again.
No.
So if we win, we're getting less picks. I mean, I think we have to see what we need to see out of Tua this year, and if not, then you got to think about moving off
and get a quarterback in the draft next year. So let's go to your area of expertise, and that is offensive line. Our offensive line, good, bad, improved?
I think they're drastically improved. I mean, I think they're moving in the right direction. We got some good young tackles. I'd like to see some better play out of the center spot, but I think our two tackles, I think they have a lot of upside.
Matt Sakura at center. What do you think?
I think he's going to learn a little bit more. I think he's going to play a little faster. But I think he's going to do a fine job.
Now, again, he does have, and this was one of the reasons why Baltimore moved on from him, the injury history. Mm-hmm. How does that play in his mindset? Because he knows that's got to be in the back of his mind. He wants to make sure he stays healthy because, as I've said quite often, you're only as good as the time that you can spend on the field.
Yeah, I really believe, though, for him, he's going to come out like gangbusters because of the injuries he's had in the past. He's got to be able to prove himself right now, and he's got to make himself the guy. Otherwise, the Dolphins are going to move on in free agency next year.
Just like they would move on in the draft with a quarterback possibly if Tua doesn't show us that he's the guy at that position. So we've talked a lot about the running back position, and I'll agree with you. That is a weak spot for this team. We're loaded at receiver. We're loaded at tight end. We've got an improved offensive line. I think our quarterback situation looks good. I was disappointed, although we got Jalen Phillips at number 18, I was disappointed that we didn't try to go after one of the top running backs, either Travis Etienne or somebody from one of those picks, somewhere in the 18th pick or one of our first picks in the second round.
Yeah, I felt the same way you did. I really thought we were going to grab a back at least with the third pick that we had. I thought for sure we were going to take a running back, and we didn't. But I think if you look at the draft, I'd like to be in the personnel room, the scouting room when they made that pick. They must see something very, very special with Jalen Phillips.
I think they do, and I think I saw a lot of the write-ups about Jalen Phillips, and they're giving him a lot of good write-ups. They say that he's fast, he's got good hands, he's got quick feet, and he's able to make certain moves either to the outside or to the inside and be able to evade the blocks. So he's able to get in off the edge and get to the quarterback, and he's got a lot of speed. So I think there's obviously something that they really liked in that kid. I know we needed an edge rusher, but I thought edge was actually a little bit deeper than running back in this year's draft. And I thought, okay, if we miss out on a guy like Jalen Phillips to take one of those top backs, Najee Harris, for instance, who was available, Travis Etienne, any of those two guys. There were several others. The guy from North Carolina. There was certainly going to be somebody that could be a good edge rusher for us with our third pick, maybe even our fourth pick. But they had to have seen something. Flores coming from being a defensive background, he had to have seen something in Jalen Phillips that made him go ahead and take that pick at 18.
Well, also he's a Miami kid. You know, we know he can play in the heat. You know, we know he's not going to have injury problems. It's hard when you're coming out of like the Midwest and the Big Ten and to come down here and play in this heat. This heat down here is no joke.
No.
I still remember we drafted a kid out of Michigan State one year. He lost 27 pounds his first practice.
Wow.
Just water weight. So that means you have to drink 27 bottles of water to rehydrate yourself. How can you even eat right then? So being able to deal with the heat isn't something that anybody can do. You know, so the fact that, you know, Jalen's a guy who's played down here, he's been healthy. I think that was a lot in the decision making in that process.
And you talk about the heat being a factor. Yeah, and the Dolphins, they benefit from the fact that they practice in this heat and they play in this heat, so they're used to it. But I like the fact that the NFL has gone back to scheduling home games for the Dolphins at 1 o'clock versus 4 p.m. because that means the other team's going to come out. They're going to be wilted by the time halftime comes around. Early in the season.
I never liked the 4 o'clock game. I always liked playing at 1 down here in Miami. Now, Coach Schnellenberger taught me a lot about scheduling. Now, the reason you schedule a 4 o'clock game, especially down here, is because of church. And you'll get more fans in the stands in a 4 o'clock game than you will a 1 o'clock game typically on a Sunday.
Wow, I didn't know we had that many holy rollers down here, but that's a good thing.
Well, people get tied up in their day, you know, and the later you push a game in the afternoon, typically the more fans that you can get to show up at the stadium. And we have had a problem with fans down here over the last 20 years. It's, you know, we haven't sold out every game. It's been some difficulty. But I love the 1 o'clock game. It's such an advantage for us, and I wish we'd do it more.
Well, I remember, and you're right, when it comes to the fans, and I've always been disappointed in that a little bit because but that's the nature of the beast when you live in South Florida. You have a whole lot of snowbirds come down here. They're from Michigan. They're from New York. So you go sometimes, though, in the last 20 years, or actually definitely in the last 15 when we've fallen on hard times and haven't been as competitive as we've wanted to be, you'd see sometimes more fans, or at least louder fans from the opposing team than we've got rooting for the Dolphins. And then it brings me back to, I remember we played the Cowboys one year, and Jason Taylor saw a banner for the Cowboys and ran over there and ripped that thing right off of the wall.
Yeah, I remember that. But again, South Florida is a tough market. There's so much to do here. I mean, look at us right now. Got a beautiful day, sitting on the water, just chatting away. And those 1 o'clock games are hot for fans.
They are, especially when they didn't have that canopy over Joe Robbie Stadium.
Oh, I know. I said I think I told you this yesterday. I took my I had season tickets when I first stopped playing, and my son was 9 months old, and my dad was sick, and I wanted to at least have the opportunity for my son to go to a game with my father. And everybody in the stands, the fans are yelling at me to pick my kid up and get him out of there before I killed him with heat stroke. And I'm like, all right, we'll just stay until halftime, and I'll get him out of here. I wanted to make sure he had an opportunity to be with my father, though. So, yeah, those stands can be very, very brutal.
Yeah, and I remember, the Orange Bowl. You said you did get a chance to experience the Orange Bowl by playing in college in a bowl game, but that stadium was even hotter because at least Joe Robbie Stadium, it was concrete.
Yeah.
The Orange Bowl was all steel, and you're sitting in a steel bowl.
Yeah,
it was that hot sun.
Orange Bowl. We had a couple scrimmages there, but the Orange Bowl was definitely a very hot and loud stadium.
Very loud stadium. And that's one thing I want the fans this year, Joe Robbie Stadium, and I know I still call it Joe Robbie, Miami Dolphins Stadium, whatever it is, you guys make some noise. We all learned the good way, though. At this new stadium, you take off your flip-flops or your shoes and you pound you pound the seat back of the person in front of you because everybody's standing on every play and screaming and hollering and slapping the back of that seat with their hands or their shoes.
But I'll tell you what, though, there's still nothing like playing Monday night here in Miami. I mean, with the warm breeze coming off the ocean, and the fans have always been fantastic on Monday Night Football. But again, I'm glad they went back to the 1 o'clock games this year.
I am too. I got to ask you a question because you're from the Chicagoland area originally. Going back to 1985, Chicago Bears come to Miami, Monday Night Football. Were you a Bears fan back then?
Oh, of course I was. I watched the Bears every week, and what was great was I got to play with Wilbur Marshall in New York.
Very nice.
And I'm like, I super fan Dom the whole year. I'm like, oh, you got to tell me everything that was going on. I wanted to ask him about the Miami game, and, we were all devastated in Chicago. And the one thing Wilbur Marshall told me, he goes, John, we didn't care about beating Miami. We were so tired of beating each other up in that cold weather in Chicago. He goes, all of us were out all night long, including the coaching staff. So to them, the Bears said they didn't even care about winning, being undefeated. They just needed a vacation from Mike Ditka and Buddy Ryan.
And I can certainly understand that. I know I've met Mike Ditka on several occasions and never met Buddy Ryan, but I can understand. And if you look at his son Rex Ryan and his brother, they're just, they fall right off of the apple tree. Buddy wasn't the easiest guy to get along with.
Yeah, my cousin was cut from that team, and Buddy Ryan really liked him. So Buddy Ryan wanted to keep him and actually cut William the Refrigerator Perry. And Ditka did, because they drafted him. Ditka said no way, and that's why Ditka played him on offense that year. But my cousin came down to the last cut, and then he wound up going to Seattle. But he actually had a chance to beat out the Fridge.
Wow.
And Buddy really liked him, so it was kind of neat.
Do you remember what Buddy said when Jimmy came out of college to come down and coach Dallas?
No, what he said?
He said, there ain't no East Carolinas in this league.
I think Jimmy did a pretty good job, though.
I think he did, too. I've always thought of what the Dolphins front office has been able to do with that Laramie Tunsil trade. Not quite the haul that Jimmy was able to pick up for Herschel Walker, but probably the closest thing we've seen since that trade.
It's not done yet. Everybody forgets that Herschel Walker didn't have that many picks originally. Jimmy went back in and retraded all the picks.
That's right.
I just watched a documentary on it because I didn't know all that as well. I thought it was all the players and the greatest train robbery in history.
Yeah.
But really, it's what Jimmy did with the picks after he acquired a couple.
Very similar to what Chris Greer has been doing with the picks that we picked up from Houston.
And what Belichick's done over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Belichick, and that's the thing, I think, when you have a guy like Brian Flores comes in here, you look at coaches like Jimmy Johnson, you look at coaches like Bill Belichick, they know how to use that draft capital. I know, and they slot players, and they give them a point system, however they end up ranking these players, and they put them into a position. Jimmy came out with the trade sheet, what the points were going to be if you're number 5 and you want to move up to number 1, how many points it's worth.
Which everybody uses now.
Everybody uses that, yeah. And it's interesting to me how much computers and mathematics has made its way into the game.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought? And even the film content now, if you with the cut-ups, you can go in the computer room right now and say, okay, I want to see this defense with this play, with this personnel grouping, and they'll split it all up for you right there. You'll have it in 2 seconds and have 100 different plays or 100 plays of the same thing that you want to see. Or you want to see what blitzes are running or what coverages are running. The way the film game has probably changed more than anything in the last 30 years.
With the age, the digital age coming in, and you're not splicing film in an editing room.
I couldn't even imagine doing that, where you had to cut each and every piece of film in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then re-splice them up and match it. Now you just hit a computer button, and you get everything that you need.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing. For those of you that have not, or fans that have not been to the stadium or have not had a chance to tour the stadium, you've got to go do that. Go tour the stadium, because when you get a chance to go into that one section, which is kind of like a museum, you see Shula's office set up, you see the old film room, and I mean, these guys were sitting at desks like I remember sitting at in grade school with that old camera and that little film, the 8mm film, and that's how they did everything back in the 70s.
I can't even imagine how they did it.
I can't either.
I mean, but now the coaches are putting it in the same time, but they don't have to do all that busy work.
Yeah.
So they're honing their craft even more
Right.
with all the film that they were able to obtain.
The NFL game has certainly come into the 21st century. Computers have had a lot to do with it. I'm excited about this season. I'm glad to have you as my co-host. Now, next week I'll be back in Las Vegas. I think I'm coming back September 18th. I'll be in town for the home opener against the Bills. But we definitely want to be live by week 1 and do our first show that Wednesday live before the Patriots game. Of course, we have to go to Foxborough for week 1. What's your take on that?
We always have good luck playing at Foxborough. We've always done well. Coach Flores has his guys right now, and I think Coach Flores has something to prove a little bit to his mentor. So I'm looking forward for a big win opening day.
I am too, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more as we go through camp. Next week we'll have a lot more news from camp to talk about. I'm going down on Saturday. Are you going to join me?
Yeah, sure. Give me a call.
Absolutely. Sounds good. John, it's great having you here this week.
Great being here.
And we're going to have a blast this
year. See you
year.
again in a few weeks.
All right, absolutely.
All right.
This is this week's edition of Dolphin Radio. We'll see you next week. And until then, go Dolphins.